Picture an empire at the absolute height of its power, an unstoppable military that had conquered most of the known world. Forged in civil war and led by the brilliant Emperor Augustus, the Roman eagle had cast its shadow over lands from Syria to Britain. Its legions were legendary, a force of iron discipline and tactical genius that had crushed every enemy in its path. In the early 1st century AD, it seemed like nothing could stop Rome's ambition. The next target? Germania, that vast, dark expanse of forest and swamp east of the Rhine River. To the Romans, this was a wild, untamed land filled with fierce tribes. But it was definitely conquerable, and the process was already underway. Forts were being built, taxes collected, and Roman law imposed. The new province of Germania seemed just a few years away from being fully folded into the empire. But that's not what happened. History was about to take a very different and much bloodier turn. We're talking about nearly 20,000 of its best soldiers, not to mention their cavalry, auxiliaries, and all the followers and equipment that came with them. He forced Roman taxes and laws on the local tribes with little respect for their customs or their fiercely independent spirit. To Varus, the Germans were a conquered people, and he treated them that way, breeding a quiet resentment that was simmering just below the surface. Born a prince of a powerful Germanic tribe, the Curusi, Arminius was taken to Rome as a noble hostage, which was a common way to ensure a tribe's loyalty. But he wasn't just locked away. He was given a full Roman education, trained in Roman warfare, and even granted Roman citizenship. He was the bridge between two worlds who could help bring Germania into the empire. But inside Arminius, a deep conflict was raging. He'd seen Rome's might up close, but he'd also seen its arrogance and the crushing weight it was placing on his people. That loyalty he showed, it was a mask. Underneath, his true allegiance was to the dark forests of his homeland. For years, he secretly built a conspiracy, uniting tribes that often fought each other, the Curusi, the Marsi, the Bructeri, with one single, audacious goal: to completely destroy the Roman presence in Germania. He climbed the military ladder, eventually leading a unit of German auxiliary cavalry. He was a Roman knight, a trusted officer serving directly under Varus. A small rebellion had popped up in a remote area to the north, he said. Nothing the legions couldn't handle, but it meant they needed to take a detour. His trust was so absolute that he ignored a direct, desperate warning. A Cheruscan nobleman named Segus, whose own daughter had actually run off with Arminius, came to Varus in person and laid the entire plot bare. He accused his son-in-law of treason and begged Varus not to go into the forest. He even offered to be held prisoner with Arminius and the other leaders until the truth came out. Varus just dismissed it. He saw it as a petty feud between two local rivals, not a real threat. It was a catastrophic mistake. Instead of using the known military roads, Arminius talked Varus into marching his army through the dense, treacherous, and unfamiliar terrain of the Teutoburg Forest. As the Roman column snaked along a narrow, muddy track, a violent storm broke out, turning the path into a swamp and throwing the already long line of soldiers into chaos. The legionaries, weighed down by heavy armor and gear, struggled through the mud and thick woods. Germanic warriors, lightly armed and moving easily through the forest they knew so well, threw javelins from the cover of the trees, cutting down the exposed Romans before vanishing back into the woods. The Roman army, designed for open field combat, was useless here. They were bogged down, unable to maneuver, and couldn't effectively fight back against an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. The first day was a chaotic bloodbath. That night, what was left of the army built a makeshift camp, a tiny island of Roman order in a sea of terror. The terrain itself became an enemy. The dense forest and boggy ground made it impossible for the Romans to form their famous, impenetrable battle lines. They were just a long, broken-up snake, ripe for the slaughter. Their only hope was to break out of the forest. The 3 legions were wiped out almost to a man. Some survivors were captured, only to be sacrificed to the Germanic gods or burned alive in wicker cages. The historian Suetonius tells us how Emperor Augustus reacted. Known for his composure, Augustus reportedly tore his clothes in grief, let his hair and beard grow for months, and was often heard banging his head against a wall, crying, "Quinctilius Varus, legions read, Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions. Ancient writers tell us that Roman prisoners were still being found and freed from Germanic tribes. 40 years later, in 3 days, an entire Roman army, more than a tenth of the empire's total military might, had been erased. Germanicus was recalled to Rome, and the grand project of a Roman province stretching to the Elbe River was abandoned for good. The defeat brought the era of Roman expansion under Augustus to a sudden halt. Panic even gripped the capital, with people fearing a massive German army would pour across the Rhine. It effectively set the Rhine River as the permanent border of the Roman Empire in the west, a boundary that would hold for the next 400 years. East of the Rhine, the Germanic tribes were left to develop their own cultures and languages. Free from Roman influence, thousands of Roman artifacts have been found, hobnails from sandals, armor fragments, broken swords, and coins stamped with Varus's own mark. The bones of men and animals tell a silent story of the slaughter. Perhaps most hauntingly, a silver-plated iron cavalry mast was unearthed apiece for parades. Not battle, a pristine, human face staring out from the soil, a symbol of the pride and pageantry that was so brutally extinguished in the forest mud. This preservation of a distinct Germanic identity would change the future of Europe. Varus failed because he trusted the wrong man and underestimated his enemy. Arminius won by using the knowledge Rome gave him to destroy his teachers. He would eventually be assassinated by his own people, who feared he was becoming too powerful, but his legacy was secure. In Germany, he's remembered as a national hero who saved his people from Roman conquest. And let us know in the comments, what other pivotal battles from the ancient world do you want us to cover? Thanks for watching. The story of the Teutoburg Forest is a stark reminder that no empire is invincible, and that history can turn on a single person in the right place at the right time. It's the story of how 20,000 men marched into a forest, and how the echo of their disappearance shaped the world we live in today. It was these barbarian peoples who would, centuries later, help bring about the fall of the Western Roman Empire and form the new kingdoms of medieval Europe. The language line that still exists today, separating Latin-based Romance languages from Germanic languages, can be traced right back to this one bloody battle. They abandoned most of their supplies, burning wagons to speed up their march, and tried to make a desperate run for the nearest Roman fortress, miles away. His legions marched to the site of the massacre, where they found the bleached bones of their comrades still scattered across the forest floor. They gathered the remains and buried them, a final, somber tribute. Germanicus even managed to defeat Arminius in battle, and recovered 2 of the 3 lost legionary eagles, a huge point of honor for Rome. But these were victories of revenge, not conquest. In terms of pure numbers, the defeat at Cannae against Hannibal was probably worse. But when you look at the strategic impact, Teutoburg was arguably far more significant. Cannae was a disaster that the Roman Republic, through sheer grit, eventually overcame. Teutoburg was a wound that never really healed, a psychological blow that fundamentally changed the empire's grand strategy. It forced the world's greatest power to admit it had limits. The Romans tried desperately to storm the wall but were beaten back. Panic set in. The command structure fell apart. One of Varus's top officers abandoned the infantry with the cavalry, trying to flee. It was a cowardly and futile move. He and his horsemen were hunted down and killed. But Arminius was always one step ahead. He funneled the retreating Romans into another, even more clever trap. At the foot of a hill we now call Calcrease, the Germans had built a long earthen wall along the path, hidden by the trees. The Roman forces were shattered, exhausted, and demoralized. The relentless attacks and the terrifying landscape had broken them. There was no discipline left, just small groups of men fighting for their lives, getting picked off one by one. Seeing that all hope was lost and wanting to avoid the shame of capture, Publius Quinctilius Varus fell on his sword and took his own life. Many of his senior officers did the same. This created a deadly bottleneck, with the wall on one side and a huge bog on the other. It was a brilliant and deadly lie. He was confident, maybe asterisk confident in the power of his legions, and never thought to doubt the loyalty of his local allies. Now, imagine all of them just vanishing. This isn't a myth. The legions marched not in a battle-ready formation, but in a long, straggling line, totally unprepared for an attack. Under the excuse of gathering his own forces to help the Romans, Arminius and his conspirators rode away from the column. They weren't going to help Rome. They were going to get into position and spring the trap. The legions were now alone, marching deeper and deeper into what would become their tomb. This is the true story of how a trusted friend, a man raised and educated by Rome itself, lured an entire army into a death trap. This is the story of the ambush that stopped an empire in its tracks, carved a bloody line on the map that would define Europe for centuries, and left an emperor crying out in despair. This is the story of the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. It was supposed to be a routine march through territory that was considered mostly peaceful. The column of soldiers stretched for miles, slowed down by a huge baggage train and thousands of civilian camp followers, making it dangerously vulnerable. Imagine 3 of Rome's elite legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, first. There's Publius Quinctilius Varus, the Roman governor of Germania. Varus was an experienced politician, an administrator, a nobleman who was even related to the emperor by marriage. He'd run wealthy provinces like Syria and was good at managing complex civic problems. But Varus was an administrator, not a general. He was a man of the courthouse, not the battlefield. To really get what went so wrong, you have to understand the 2 men at the heart of it all. His approach to governing Germania was clumsy and heavy-handed. And that brings us to the other man, Arminius. His story is one of the most dramatic in all of ancient history. To Varus, Arminius was the poster boy for Rome's civilizing mission, a barbarian prince turned into a loyal Roman commander. In the late summer of 09 AD, Varus was getting ready to move his 3 legions from their summer camp back to their winter quarters along the Rhine. This was the moment Arminius had been waiting for. He came to Varus with a fake story. Varus, who had a habit of underestimating his enemies, didn't see any reason to doubt his trusted officer, trusting Arminius completely. Varus didn't take even basic precautions. No scouts were sent ahead. The trap snapped shut around September 9th. Then, the attack came from all sides. It wasn't one big battle, but a non-stop series of hit-and-run ambushes. The second day brought no relief. Varus knew he'd been betrayed and his army was in mortal danger. From behind this wall, the Germanic warriors rained down missiles on the Romans trapped below. The third day was the end, with the leadership gone. The last bit of resistance crumbled into a full-scale massacre. The news of the Clades Variant the Varian disaster struck Rome like a physical blow. It was a psychological shock the empire never quite recovered from. The loss was very real. The legion numbers 17, 18, and 19 were considered so unlucky they were never used again, a rare and telling decision. Rome would, of course, seek revenge. The brilliant young general Germanicus led several campaigns back into Germania. Between 14 and 16 AD, the new emperor, Tiberius, decided that conquering and holding Germania was just too costly. The risk wasn't worth the reward. The long-term impact of this battle was enormous. The archaeological site at Calcrease, Germany, believed to be the final, decisive battlefield, continues to give up its grim secrets. So, back to the big question. Was this Rome's biggest defeat? The battle was a perfect storm of Roman arrogance, a brilliant betrayal, and the brutal reality of guerrilla warfare. If you enjoyed this dive into Roman history, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more stories just like this one.